Hello, this is LizardGenes, and this is my first podcast. And joining me today is
Hello, I'm Danny, and this is also my first podcast. But my YouTube account name is Wadanny for anyone who is interested.
okay. And we've just been playing the original Unreal, and kind of an interesting experience. And I think what we're going to do is use this podcast as a way of kind of amalgamating all our thoughts about, the game. And I guess the most basic one, first of all, is does it stand up? Is it still a good game?
Okay.
And I mean, I think it does still stand up. I think it's still a good game. I think one of the things that we noticed most was the technology in comparison to other stuff at the time. It was quite revolutionary.
Yeah, I think. I mean, for me, like I said, the biggest things for me was that it still has the same sense of atmosphere all these years later.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, I know we made the comparison with Quake II quite a lot, which I think did a lot of things better than Unreal in some respects. But the atmosphere in Unreal for me, the kind of dim lighting and the water, the beauteousness of the world, and yet at the same time the kind of harsh, colonization by the Skaarj. It's all very well represented even back then. It was in 98.
98, yeah. And that's interesting because, I mean, automatically the comparison is with Quake 2 because those two games kind of went head to head. Quake 2 had the kind of instant action and the guns and the legacy. I mean, rocket launchers and shotguns, that's its kind of mark. But Unreal's, it's interesting because it does have the technological environments and, the Skaarj have a distinct architectural imprint in the same way that the Strog do, but then you've got these other architectural influences. I mean, you were talking about the Nali, for instance. I mean, the relationship, you talked about colonization there. The relationship between the Skaarj and the Nali is something that completely eluded me the first time I played it. Yeah. I played it when I was, 98, so I was early teens. And that, the readable text completely kind of eluded me, the colonization of the Nali by the Skaarj. But I mean, that was an interesting kind of thing. I mean, did you notice that the first time round, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, like I say, I think when we played it the second time, we spotted a lot of the nuances that we didn't see. And
absolutely.
I mean, when I first played it, I was being the same age as you roughly, and I mean, even at that point, I was aware enough to understand that these Nali had, they were a bit like the scientists in Half-Life. It's like it seemed like they'd been put there as a kind of toy for the Skaarj, or for the kind of if the player was that way inclined, a bit of a a kind of bit of a cruelty merchant, then they could just kill them but then I thought, well, they've been invaded. You tell by the text that they've been invaded. The temples are all claiming demonic invasion and all. It's the very fact that they perceive the Skaarj as demons as opposed to hostile aliens because of their technology. They don't understand. Sky demons. And so I think, but the second time around, like, I mean, it was interesting the thing you mentioned as a kind of them as a sacrificial culture.
Yeah, and obviously to you, the animation, they sort of bow down to you, but they also bow down to the Skaarj. And there was that one, remember that one scene? It was about an alley was bowing down to a Skaarj and the Skaarj slaughtered him. And I thought, is this ritualized? Is this something that's inherent in both cultures? The Skaarj innately understand they have to suppress an alley, and the Nali are looking to be suppressed. Because like some of the stuff, like the sacrificial elements, like those crucifixes, I mean, I don't think the Skaarj erected those. I think those were put there by the Nali. Like they were embedded in the walls of that ancient temple. Like, the I can't remember what the name of the castle was. It was a Nali castle, but it was Bluff Eversmoke. That's it. And in the windows of that architecture, which was clearly not built by the Skaarj, was this kind of crucifix. So is it like part of their culture?
Well, I suppose. I mean, another thing you could ask is why would the Skaarj, as an invading force with nothing but disdain, why would they crucify the Nali with their own religious symbol?
Well, exactly.
It's like they would look down on something like that. So in a way, I think there is almost this kind of symbiosis of. It's almost as if like a predator prey dynamic in the wild evolved to be sentient.
Yeah, and it became cultural.
Because
I mean, the Skaarj obviously are a warrior race, and they don't. I mean, I don't think they're religious. I think they disdain religion. They've got their own sort of warrior caste, and they believe in the absolute power of the hierarchy, the queen.
Yeah.
And the Skaarj are quite hierarchical. They've got the warrior class, the scout class. They're all very geared towards war, but at the same time, their presence on the Napoli world seemed to actually. It seemed like they acted as executioners and almost like this was the judgment of Nali, and that they were being kind of, I don't know, the Nali were being slaughtered and it was like they felt it was their own fault, in the same way that we talk about Judgment Day and all that kind of stuff here. So yeah, I mean that completely eluded me first, and I actually reapproached Unreal and its readable text with a lot more respect, with a lot more in that now. And this is not just us reading it. I think this is actually I think the developers actually wrote this purposely. And
then I think it's interesting as well that you come across pardon me, you come across literature from like the other indentured races that are aligned with the Skaarj, like the Crow, and they're very disenchanted with them. And it's interesting that they kind of there's obviously they're not Nali sympathizers, but they're also, I think they feel a bit like tools, and they said as it were, and they say, oh, the Skaarj are treated as like second class citizens, even though, and the Skaarj, at times they don't deign themselves worthy. Well, sorry, not worthy. They don't deign themselves as being. They don't deign looking after the Nali as being their,
it's like that's below them.
Yeah, so they give it to the Crow, and the Crow kind of, in their, you see again, it's in their writings, their rumblings about, we've got Nali duty again.
It's almost like the Romans, who believed that they were like the utmost, or the Koreans in the future. The Koreans and the Romans in their own time periods believed that their society and their culture was like the highest possible. It was this kind of exceptionalism, and the Skaarj are the same. They look down on non-Skaarj as being, not necessarily in a hostile way, but it's like, this is the Nali are clearly, they're children compared to us. They need to be looked after in inverted commas, and it's your job, the dog's bodies of the Crow, to kind of do that.
Yeah, and yet you get these scripted sequences at times where clearly a Nali is supposed to die.
Yeah,
it was like.
That
shining moment.
I remember that bit. That was
where where you first get to the
sky.
The sky, you take the lift up from the sun spire, and you end up at the top. And very first thing, and Nali's being chucked off by two Crow, and my desperate attempts to save him. After which he then decided to leap off the edge.
So he was suicidal. So it's almost like, obviously this is clearly a code script error, but it's like if you look at it from a cultural perspective, the Nali wants to commit suicide because it's ingrained in his.
Yeah, and no one else was there to kill him.
And we can't, as bystanders or onlookers, we cannot interfere in this relationship that plays out. We have to let the Nali do what they want. Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's like one of these. I mean, the other thing is if you've got a messiah complex. I mean, I think you get these two types of gamers. Like you get the scientist killers in Half-Life who murder everyone in sight, and then you've got the messiah complex players like me who is upset if a little rabbit gets trodden on.
See, it's funny because I have a tendency to I hate rats in games, and I always shoot rats in games because they're annoying. But in this game, there are many. There's a lot of fauna that's indigenous to the planet that's non-hostile, and you're expecting me to shoot it and say, "Oh, shoot, you're going to be terrible at this. You're going to,
kill all the Nali cows."
And yet, I was not at all. I was not at all in that.
No, I was impressed. I think you've grown because really. Your tolerance for the cute little innocent
I was taken with the world. It was the beauty of the Nali world, and not its.
Right. So God forbid you don't like the look of the world. So it'll be worse. Yeah. They thought they had it rough with the Skaarj.
I know,
but they don't know what it.
About. Let's talk about the humans then. So because the humans are kind of onlookers. I mean, obviously, you play this character that's crashed on a prison ship, and the prison ship's crashed and you escape, but you're kind of caught up in this narrative as we've talked about. That's. I mean, the humans are interesting as well because they're almost cast as survivors or attempted survivors of this kind of new world.
Well, I mean, I find it interesting that. I mean, I don't know if it's interesting or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's obvious that the Skaarj attack you on sight. The Skaarj are obviously an intelligent race. They're not just savages. They have vast intelligence and yet the very first thing, and I don't know if it's one of these things where maybe they judge a race physically. I don't know. Like they maybe look at you and instinctively recognize that humans are not predatory in the same way as them. Like we were talking about, if you fought without weapons, the Skaarj would just be like a ragdoll to him. And it's like it's only because human beings have guns that they have the capacity to resist the Skaarj.
And they've got a knack for survival invention that the Skaarj see in their own culture, whereas the Nalis are just kind of stuck in this medieval past. It seems one of the things you commented on was this kind of interesting, the medieval world of the superstitious Nali and their gods versus the kind of, technological, warlike world of the Skaarj, and they're kind of both, architecturally speaking, rammed up against each other. I mean, remember that when you come out of the that Skaarj building, and then there's the old Nali town. So it's this,
Dirk's elbow.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Yeah, they're literally rammed up against each other, and that's kind of an interesting visual statement.
Oh, definitely, that's very striking. I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because that's something that really struck me. Like when you come out again, it's just literally a culture clash. That base or ship or whatever it is has literally descended onto the planet and clamped on to this small town, this little outcrop, and it's like, it is literally, the collision of these two cultures, and it's odd, because I think it's one of these things that's so easy to get wrong. If someone could think, we're gonna showcase our 3D engine, so we're gonna have the best of medieval, we're gonna have old gritty Gothic castles, but we're also gonna have high tech and rivets, and goodness knows what else, and all the technology. We're gonna have it all, but somehow it worked. I don't know if it was accidental. If it just, or if they sat down with every scene and said, "Nah, this doesn't feel right," and then until they got it right,
Well, in those days, they didn't really have as much emphasis on concept art. I think I don't know. I mean, maybe Unreal's world was a lucky fluke that just seemed to work. And I mean, I think you're right. The combination is striking. You don't get that in Quake II, because in Quake II you get one world that you progress through. Like you get the start of the world, which is very basic. You've got the base level, which is all kind of military outposts, and then you get further and further into the Strog's city. It becomes more, obviously, more grand. You get the palace and stuff, but you're ultimately going through the same world built by the same race. Whereas in Unreal it's the opposite. You've got two, and maybe even three, because it's arguable that some of the structures the Nali didn't build, like the mines. That I don't think the Nali built them, but I don't think the Skaarj built them either.
Well, that'd be an interesting thing to talk about actually now, is this idea, because this I think is a thing for both of us that kind of came out from the most recent playthrough that we did. This idea that suddenly it may not be the case that medieval equals Nali and tech equals Skaarj. There might even be a third power,
Sunspire,
because of some of the buildings, even though they are not Skaarj, couldn't possibly really have been built by the Nali.
So they're kind of like, they're sustained by a magical element it's clearly not technological like the Skaarj, but it's far in advance of what the Nali had. And it's almost like, I mean, the comparison I brought up at the time was the Forerunners in Halo, because you've got the Covenant, who discovered these ancient structures which are very technologically advanced, but the humans didn't build them, the Covenant didn't build them, somebody else built them. It's like an unknown race that maybe occupied the planet beforehand, and I think the case is that's the case in Unreal as well. And again, we didn't appreciate that at the time, but now we've played a lot of these games and we're kind of teasing out the narrative structure of it, and actually, it's a lot more advanced than I initially thought.
Yeah. I mean, looking back at, I think the Nali, they obviously have certain powers that Skaarj humans are. They have telepathy. They have telekinesis, because they can hover and things like that. And so, I mean, unless it's one of these things, I mean, you occasionally get these things where, there's a kind of a red herring, and you're led to believe that the kind of the victim race is actually a lot more powerful than it looks. And I mean, I suppose there's maybe the lift to the sky pillar is powered by Nali telepathy, or the Nali's sense
it's being willed, it's hovering, it's being willed by the collective.
Or it's maybe being powered by their desire to be killed, or I don't know. But I mean, it's just, oh dear, I mean, it's, there's a lot to think about, really.
I mean, I think one of the things that, I mean, we've discovered that Unreal has a very advanced world. There's a lot of lore there, there's a lot of races, but it seems they kind of threw all that away for Unreal Tournament. And don't get me wrong, I love Unreal Tournament. Unreal Tournament is great, but they got rid of this huge world, or I mean, it was more than a world. It was clearly a galaxy. Like for example, I'd like to have seen what the Skaarj home planet would look like, or what other presence the humans had. And when they finally got round to doing that, I mean, it's kind of narrated in Unreal Tournament and the Unreal Tournament series. You've got Leandri, you've got these different corporations and different planets and what these industrial buildings look like. But it's not like you're reading text, it's not single player. And when they went to Unreal 2, Unreal 2's development was, botched, and they were up against the time limit, and the whole thing was a shadow of what it should have been. But it's so interesting that they never went back, and it's obvious that you could, and really develop all these interesting narrative events. Like, what are the Nali really? What drives the Skaarj to kill, or what drives their warrior culture? I mean, there's so much in there, and they haven't gone back to it. I mean,
I'd like to see, I said this before, but again, this concept that the Skaarj attack you on sight, but they're actually quite, in a way, I find the Skaarj very interesting, even the way they're programmed in the game as enemies, because even though they're only enemies, they're interesting because, like in Quake II, you feel like you're confronting an army. Every part of it fights for the greater whole. Like the little,
they're all part of the same.
Yeah, the little troops, the little human troops run up and shoot you at close range to essentially to die. They're cannon fodder, whereas the big tanks hang back and blast you with rockets.
Yeah.
But the Skaarj, there's an honor and a kind of a warrior. There's almost a kind of bushido to the Skaarj. Like they fight you individually.
Aye.
Because they want to engage you. I mean, even if they infinitely respawn occasionally, they do fight. They have this kind of they want to take you one on one. They want to test themselves against you, and it's almost, it feels as if there's a sense of honor in the Skaarj. But I'd really be interested to see different dimensions to the Skaarj.
Yeah.
Like. Are they all? So. I mean, this is always something I find interesting about the way they depict alien races in games and TV, for that matter, is that humanity has shades of grey, but alien races are usually black or white. And so, is every single Skaarj a sort of snarling, super intelligent crocodile, or are some of them do some of them have different characters?
Yeah, I mean, that would be interesting, and I'd love them to go down that narrative route, but ultimately what they've done is, I mean, this is what you said before, it's like fighting a bot. When you fight a Skaarj, you fight a bot.
Yeah, very skilled.
And maybe that's what they took. They looked at the technology behind Unreal and thought, great, that's awesome. But I mean, obviously at the time, Quake III, that was it turned that into a multiplayer only game, and then that was the beginning of the esports scene.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of interest in that, and maybe, as we discussed before, Epic decided to think, they're doing multiplayer only, and since they're kind of like our rivals, we ought to do the same. And don't get me wrong, I'll say it again, I do love Unreal Tournament, but I feel they maybe lost their nerve a bit, and they never got back to, in Unreal 2, they never hit the heights of Unreal 1.
No, well, it was a completely different game. I mean, I always maybe naively looked at Unreal Tournament as a spin-off. Like,
it is ultimately a spin-off, yeah.
You're right.
The spin-off kind of overran the original series.
But then that's it, yeah. I mean, it's a bit like Frasier with Cheers, Frasier was the spin-off.
Yeah,
and it ate, I mean, obviously people remember Cheers, they had guest stars and stuff, but it kind of got, Kelsey Grammer and the other actors kind of eclipsed it a bit in the end. And I think with Unreal, I don't know, I mean, I haven't played Unreal 2, unfortunately, so I can't compare, but from what it looks very stratified and very formulaic. From what I've read, like this notion that for a start, it sounds like they've made the mistake of too much, too many hands, too many cooks spoil the broth, because they've got the Skaarj, they've got the Kral, they've got humans,
there's
God knows how many others.
Yeah, and the thing about that game is there's no cohesion between the planet. You go to one planet, it looks like one thing. Go to another, it looks like, it's almost like they're in completely different. They're not part of a universe. It's like one developer has built one planet, one level. Another developer, it's another one. Yeah, individuals have built individual maps. There's no cohesion. Whereas in Unreal, you would go from one side of the planet to another, and it did seem like it was one whole thing, like the Straw planet in Quake II. And you lost that sense of cohesion. It was basically like missions. And I think that kind of ruined it. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to see. I mean, Unreal Tournament 3, I think, had some kind of story mode, as did Unreal Championship 2. But, I mean, I wonder why people are kind of averse. Maybe people are averse this, big single player overworld. This big single player. The whole world is a kind of thing in the FPS. I mean, the FPS is now, I don't know. It's very, as you say, formulaic. It's very kind of.
Well. Yeah, because like when I said earlier about Unreal 2 seeming stratified, to me, like what I meant by that was that when I read it, it was like every alien race seemed to be broken down into like 3 classes, like heavy, light, medium.
Yeah.
Every alien race had a way of working, and it was almost like a giant kind of skirmish bot match with different aliens rather than a story. And because what I liked about the Skaarj was you discovered them kind of you discovered them piecemeal, and you also discovered them kind of pell-mell, and that you
Yeah.
would find you would stumble. You would think, right, the first Skaarj you meet is the scout,
Yeah.
and he attacks you in the dark, and he's really fast, and he's really tough, and it does, as you say, it greatly showcases the thing about them being almost like bots. So they're really, it's not like Doom where you mow down thousands of them with one shot.
Yeah.
The Skaarj are a warrior race in every sense, and they will fight you. They will give you a fight, and you sort of dodging left and right and blasting it, and you think, right, great, I've beaten the Skaarj. And you think, right, okay, I've got the measure of the Skaarj. It's a big lizard. It jumps about. It's got a laser gun and a big knife. Okay, great. And then you stumble into the Titan.
Oh God!
Which throws gravity-defying rocks.
I hate that. Yeah.
And you think, right, so they're also, Tyrannosauruses with bouncy boulders.
But somehow, we've discussed this before, the Titans somehow works. I mean,
it does.
I don't think it was a Skaarj
No.
thing, but the Nali it was almost like the Nali, like you said, the unruly doll. I thought it was like, in Lord of the Rings, there's a cave troll.
Yes.
It's like that, really, except obviously the Nali are kind of peaceful, so they maybe use it to carve out big chasms in which they build the buildings. But they just couldn't control it.
No.
And as soon as it saw anything it didn't like, it just went into a rage.
Attacks it.
But as ridiculous as those, they're basically bosses, as ridiculous as they were, it kind of fitted into the world. Whereas in Unreal 2, you had enemies. I mean, you had these corporations fighting it out, and that kind of worked. But then you had enemies which didn't seem to have any form of, they didn't belong in that world.
No.
It just seemed really bizarre, and they didn't think about the overall project. So
no, how it worked when it was all cohesive. It was all
Yeah.
No, definitely.
I mean, I think we've kind of talked about everything.
Yeah.
The only other thing is, and this is kind of a question that everyone asks me. We had, there's always these rivalries. There was Duke v Quake.
Oh no!
But I mean, were you? I mean, in honest, as objective as you can be, were you Pro Quake 2 or Pro Unreal? Or was there a third game that you thought was the game of that time?
I'm going to get accused of being the big diplomat here, but to be honest, I'm not Pro one or the other. Do you know? I think actually I'd probably be more Pro Quake 2. I'm amazed I'm saying that because
Unreal seems more like your kind of game.
It is, and the thing is, as I've said before, for me, if it's atmosphere, it's Unreal hands down.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
And the technology thing is.
But there was something about Quake 2. It have got a knack for enemy design. The straw really captured my imagination. This idea that they were manufactured from all over the shop with basically whatever parts they had lying around. And I mean, things like the tank. I mean, the straw tank, I'm sorry, but when I first fought that thing, I thought, wow,
this
thing is amazing. It's stomping around with an even bigger gun than me, I think it was possible. And,
as challenging as the Skaarj are, they're not as memorable as the...
No.
Yeah, the tank. And of course, the weapons in Quake 2. I mean, like the railgun.
Super shotgun.
And the super shotgun. And the noise of the super shotgun was just perfect.
Yeah.
And, I mean, looking back, I mean, Epic are kind of... I mean, they went away and did Gears of War, and that's a completely different... That's a different world. It's single player oriented, and so maybe we did get something, but it wasn't the Unreal.
Yeah, but it could have been Unreal.
It could have been, and there's still room for it. And I think there's a lot of gamers like us that loved Unreal and go back to it. And technologically speaking, I think the Unreal Engine was great at the time. It must have. I mean, I remember how gobsmacked I was at the size. I mean, there's always a moment, like in Ocarina of Time, you get out to Hyrule Field, or in Oblivion, you get out of the sewers. And these massive open spaces. The bit when you get out of the prison ship into the valley, that's the same. That was Unreal's moment of that.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I think that's us talking about Unreal.
Yeah.
We are at the moment playing Far Cry.
Oh yeah.
Far Cry 1. So anyone who's listening to this podcast and wants to play along, dig out your own copy of Far Cry 1. If you haven't got it, it's really cheap. You can get it for a couple of quid or whatever currency you're dealing in. Play Far Cry 1, play it on easy.
Yeah, for love of...
Because I'm misremembering how difficult, I've been spotting Far Cry 3, which is not easy, but it's fair. Far Cry 3 is fair.
And for goodness sake, don't approach the island in the boat, or you will get blown up and you won't even see the missile that's heading towards your face. So yeah.
So Far Cry 1, we'll talk more about that later on. I mean, obviously, I've played all the Far Crys and I love them. This is your first foray into Far Cry. I got this for your birthday, this game.
Yeah.
So... Yeah, I mean, try and play it on easy, and remember that the game is a heck of a lot slower than Far Cry 3. You're not a super ninja like you are in Far Cry 3.
Despite what the main character would want you to believe by the sound of him. Yeah.
And then the bit of the boat, we'll finish off with the bit of the boat. Remember when we tried it about 3 or 4? No, we tried it tons of times. You had to reset the difficulty level from normal to easy because that helicopter kept killing us, and there was guys, and the last guy killed you that time you played it.
Yes, Mr. I can dodge bullets by hiding behind my stupid box that can't be taken out by any weapon under the sun. Yeah.
And at the end, we finally did get past it, but remember the bit there where I jumped on the boat. There's a bit when you jump off the major, you're on this kind of crashed tanker, and that's where the helicopter fights you. But at the end, once you've done it, you jump on the lifeboat, and the implication is you fall out of the lifeboat, drops off this kind of crane thing, and then you know that's the level complete. But when I jumped onto it, I overshot it and fell in the water. I thought, I've screwed the mission up. So I just shot at the wires, and it fell down.
Which made me wonder why, what's his face, your benefactor, Mr. Benedict Doyle didn't say, rather than fighting your way through an American-infested boat, why don't you just shoot the gyros?
But I think the implication was you needed to take that helicopter out. But I think he should have made some snarky comment about,
but all that work.
Yeah, being in the same boat as you or something like that. I don't know.
No.
Just anyway, I think with that horrible joke, I think we'll finish here. Play Unreal if you haven't already done so. Replay if you haven't already done so.
And also play Quake II because it was
a
lot.
It's a good. They're two good comparisons, and we'll maybe look at comparisons to Far Cry. And I think Halo and Far Cry are like the two. I mean, I think Far Cry is a bit later, but Far Cry and Halo are kind of. Halo's the big one that everybody remembers. Far Cry isn't, and yet technologically speaking, the engine is great, and it's maybe the Unreal of its.
With its environments, definitely.
But we'll talk about that later on. That could be our next one, maybe. That's that. It's bye from me,
and it's also bye from me.
Right. Okay. Bye bye.
Thanks.